Okay, let's just jump right in. There's this core tension we see everywhere, and I think you know what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Why are so many, incredibly driven, competent people either stuck, just perpetually feeling almost ready,
Or they get there.
right? Or they finally hit that big platform, and then what happens? They just completely burn out. Or worse, they collapse under the pressure.
It is the constant riddle of modern leadership, isn't it? The materials we pulled together for this deep dive, which are a really fascinating mix of theological texts and leadership philosophy,
Yeah.
they all suggest the root problem isn't the people themselves. It's the measuring stick. The systems we use, whether that's corporate or, even in community groups, are fundamentally flawed. They reward the wrong things.
Which is why we're calling this deep dive God's Metrics for Readiness, Faithfulness over Resumes. The whole mission here is to sort of dismantle that conventional roadmap, the one that tells us success is all about accumulation.
Credentials,
Yeah.
networking.
A huge network, high visibility. We spend years perfecting the external image, the resume, the LinkedIn profile, and we just assume those are the keys to influence.
And that assumption is precisely what this deep dive is here to challenge. Our mission for you, the listener, is to completely reframe what preparation even is. We want to unpack this really counterintuitive idea that runs through all the sources.
I've used this.
That ultimate readiness, it's not measured by your achievements or your optics. It's measured by faithfulness, by obedience, by endurance. Preparation isn't a finish line you cross. It's an internal posture you have to cultivate so you can carry the weight that's coming later.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. The central problem these texts identify is that our systems reward sheer competence,
Right.
what you can do,
Right.
while tragically ignoring character, who you actually are.
Right.
And the result is what the sources call a speed gap. Leaders are advancing way faster than their inner life, their ethical foundation, can possibly support. You're being trained for the platform, but the argument here is that God is preparing you for the pressure.
And if you're appointed to a position of weight, but you haven't developed that internal anchor to handle it, well, the outcome is shockingly predictable. We see it every day. Moral failure, burnout, fragile leadership across every single sector.
So let's get specific on this misalignment. If you're getting ready for an interview, you know the human system measures you by accumulation. You list your degrees, your projects.
The question is always, what big things have you achieved?
Exactly. Readiness is treated like this outward demonstration.
And that's efficient, for a quarterly report, but it's terrible for shaping a soul. God's metrics aren't about efficiency. They're fundamentally diagnostic. They're designed to probe the real posture of your heart, usually in the most mundane circumstances.
Okay, so what are these disruptive questions then? Because I'll be honest, I spent most of my 20s worrying only about achieving things.
Well, he doesn't begin with what impressive things are on your CV. He starts much, much smaller. He starts with, have you been faithful in the very tasks you already have? And that immediately shifts the focus from, climbing the ladder to just stewarding your current spot.
Wow, that's a tough standard. Because achieving things is visible, it's rewarding. But fidelity in your small current tasks, that's often completely invisible.
And it demands even more from us, especially when it comes to reputation. So the next question isn't how visible are you? How many followers do you have?
Right.
It's how do you live when absolutely no one is watching? And then there's the ultimate litmus test for leadership potential. He doesn't ask how well do people praise you. He asks how do you respond when you are corrected?
Those 3 questions. You can't fake the answers. They're only answered, honestly, through time and obscurity, and sometimes through failure. But here's the pushback I have to give for our listeners.
Sure.
If I follow this and I only focus on hidden faithfulness, won't I just get overlooked? Doesn't the human system require me to play the game, to market my competence?
That is the core tension. It absolutely is. And the sources, they acknowledge that directly. But here's the consequence of getting it wrong. When we prioritize the resume over resilience, we end up with leaders who are perfectly positioned for a role,
But not prepared.
but tragically unprepared for the crisis that role will inevitably bring. They're recognized by the system, but they lack the internal durability to actually last.
So longevity gets compromised internally when we define our readiness externally.
Exactly. But if you flip it, if you embrace God's metrics, something extraordinary happens. Obscurity, it stops being the source of deep frustration. It becomes formative. Correction stops being a threat to your ego. It becomes a necessary diagnostic tool.
Okay.
And submission, even to a difficult boss or a flawed system, that becomes a fundamental training ground for real stewardship. God's standard doesn't lower the bar for success. It deepens the foundation.
Let's move into the three pillars the source material says are forged under that pressure. We've got obedience, humility, and endurance.
And we can start with the first one, obedience, which is always tested in the unseen. A lot of people think obedience is just, transactional compliance, following rules to get a reward.
Right, if I do X, I'll get Y.
But in this context, obedience is relational fidelity. It's aligning your will with an instruction even when that instruction seems pointless or it's unrewarded or it runs counter to your 5-year plan.
And this is where those small assignments become the diagnostic tools we were talking about. There's that quote from the material, "Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much."
Think about that in practice. Take David. Before he was a king, before he was the famous giant killer, he was just a shepherd. His job was isolated, monotonous, and definitely not on the fast track to the throne.
No.
But when a lion or a bear came for his flock, he didn't rationalize running away. He protected the sheep.
He wasn't thinking, oh, this will look great on my future leadership application.
Not at all. His faithfulness was habitual. It was an ingrained response he developed when no one was watching. He was faithful in very little, just caring for a few sheep. And that built the capacity to eventually lead a nation. God noticed those hidden habits long before anyone else did.
That flows directly into the second pillar, humility.
Yeah.
Which is almost always proven under authority. And this isn't about, being self-deprecating. It's about a profound willingness to submit to God's processes.
Yes.
Even when they are painfully slow.
Yes.
Or they just seem totally illogical.
This is the ultimate test of teachability. The sources point out that submission under imperfect authority is often the most brutal and necessary training. And again, David's the perfect example.
Right.
He's anointed king, but that anointing leads him straight into serving King Saul, a deeply wounded, fearful, jealous leader.
That's the modern equivalent of getting a promotion, but having to report to a boss who is actively trying to undermine you because they're threatened by you. It feels so unfair.
It's the ultimate character test. David had multiple clear opportunities to just seize the throne, to shortcut God's agonizing timeline. He could have killed Saul in that cave and called it divine justice.
But he didn't. He shows this restraint that is almost unimaginable. He says, "My hand shall not be against you."
And that one decision, that was the ultimate expression of humility. It was anchored in trust. Humility in this context is the safeguard against the corruption that comes with power. If you're willing to stab your way to the top because you think you deserve it,
you'll abuse it.
You will certainly abuse that power once you get it. Humility ensures that when authority is finally given, the soul receiving it is stable enough not to be destroyed by it.
And finally, that brings us to the third pillar, endurance. This is the capacity to just remain faithful over a long, long time when there is zero visible progress. The applause has stopped. The clarity about the future is gone.
Endurance reveals what your commitment is actually rooted in. Is it genuine conviction, or is it contingent on getting immediate results? Waiting tests whether your trust is anchored in the one who made the promise or just in the promise itself.
This is where the rubber meets the road, for sure. Because in our culture, waiting is downtime. It's a sign of failure or inefficiency.
Absolutely. But you can't simulate this kind of resilience in a weekend seminar. It has to be lived through unresolved tension, season after season. You have to learn how to obey without visibility, how to submit without guarantees, and how to stay committed when your life looks completely misaligned with the big calling you feel inside.
Which brings us to the ache of delay, the acute ache. I know so many listeners feel this. The calling feels clear. You know what you're meant to do, but the calendar is just blank. Why the silence? Why the waiting room?
From a human perspective, delay is inefficient. It's waste. But from the divine perspective in these sources, delay is not an inconvenience. It's a primary, non-negotiable instrument of formation. God is deliberate about forming character. He's just not in a hurry to merely deploy talent.
Talent is cheap. Character is costly.
That's it. So the question is never just, can this person do the job when everything's going well?
No.
The real terrifying question is always, can this person be trusted to carry the crushing weight this task will impose, especially when it gets hard and everyone is watching?
The sources suggest if God gave us the full timeline up front, most of us would try to strategically bypass the very obscurity and testing designed to prepare us.
And we see this pattern everywhere in the scriptures. It's the constant story of preparation. Abraham's called, but then waits decades for Isaac. Joseph gets a dream of leadership and then spends years betrayed, enslaved, imprisoned.
Moses,
Now,
called to lead millions, spends 40 years in total obscurity just tending flocks in Midian. The promise was clear, but the path was hidden, it was messy, and it was agonizingly slow. So David's wilderness, years on the run from Saul, hiding in caves, leading this band of misfits, that wasn't a detour from his readiness.
no, it was the means of it. What looks like stagnation from our perspective, a derailed career path, was, in God's economy, calculated, deliberate formation.
It sounds like the wilderness strips away everything that might have been on David's resume at that point. The military honors, the popularity,
All of it.
and it forces him to rely only on his face and his character.
Absolutely. Those years taught him dependence, which is the complete opposite of self-sufficiency. They taught him restraint, humility, and the resilience he needed to endure seasons that looked totally disconnected from his anointing. His life proves that readiness is a quality that's baked in through pressure, not just bolted on through a performance review.
Okay, let's go to the most uncomfortable test of all, the one we try to avoid, especially in professional life. Correction. This is that subtle, that absolutely crucial diagnostic tool.
Readiness is proven by your reaction to being corrected, and we have the perfect contrast in the sources, David versus Saul. David commits this grievous sin, adultery, murder, but when the prophet Nathan confronts him, David's response is immediate. It's concise. He just says, I have sinned against the Lord.
And that's it.
That's it. And that preserved his relational integrity and ultimately his capacity to keep leading.
Now contrast that with Saul. When Samuel confronts him for disobedience, Saul doesn't repent. He rationalizes. He shifts blame. He justifies everything, focusing on what he thought was right instead of what he was told to do.
And that inability to receive correction, it led to divine rejection. It sealed his fate. The sources make a really clear point here. Correction isn't meant to be punitive, it's formative. It's designed to produce a harvest of righteousness, but only if it's received properly.
So teachability, that capacity to hear a painful truth without immediately going on the defensive, it signals a heart that's oriented toward a higher standard, not just self-preservation.
Exactly, and this all ties back to relational readiness. The source highlights that true effectiveness flows from abiding, from relational depth and dependence, not just from your own sheer effort.
Right.
If you try to lead without that secure relational foundation, without prayer, listening, dependence, you risk a very superficial effectiveness. The platform will eventually expose the immaturity that your relational life couldn't sustain.
That's a powerful distinction. Moses, for example, his authority flowed from his relationship with God, speaking face to face as a man speaks to his friend. The power wasn't really in the staff he carried.
No, it was in the closeness. If your authority only comes from your title or your competence, it's going to collapse under real pressure. But if it flows from deep, developed character and a dependent relationship, it actually stabilizes you during the chaos.
So we've laid out these very countercultural metrics. For the listener who is trying to integrate this into a busy professional life, what does adopting God's metrics actually look like today?
Well, it means surrendering the timeline you have in your head. It means surrendering the comparison game and surrendering the resume that you thought defined your worth.
It's a lot of surrendering.
It is. It means making the intentional practice of hidden faithfulness your daily priority. We have to start conducting, for lack of a better term, faithfulness audits in those totally unseen responsibilities.
Okay, give me a concrete example. What's a faithfulness audit look like on a Tuesday morning?
It's auditing how you handle your expense report. Are you padding it, even a little? It's auditing your commitment to your family when you're facing a huge work deadline. It's the integrity with which you handle a confidential project that no one will ever check up on.
It's responding to that rude email with grace.
Yes. Even though you'd love to fire back,
Yeah.
the source is adamant on this point. Nothing done in quiet, sincere obedience is ever wasted.
That just shifts the goalposts entirely. So instead of tracking our achievements, we should be tracking our responses.
Exactly. The source material even suggests keeping something like a readiness discernment journal. Not to track your networking wins, but to track two key things. One, your honest response to correction over time. Did you rationalize or did you humbly adjust?
And two,
And two, noting your commitments to obedience in obscurity. What difficult, unrewarded thing did you do today simply because it was the right thing to do?
that just refocuses all your energy. The shift is complete. Delay is often a divine investment. So rather than stressing about when is this going to happen for me, the much better, more formative question is, who am I becoming while I wait?
That's it. Faithfulness in the small things today matters so much more than having clarity about the big future.
And that really is the summary of these powerful metrics, isn't it?
It is. Readiness isn't a status you achieve like a degree. It's a life that is formed moment by obedience, humility, and endurance. God only entrusts significant visibility and authority after he has shaped and proven the character.
The sources drive home that God's metrics, they don't reward the visible, they shape the invisible. And this form of readiness is resilient, that's the kind of character that can withstand the crushing pressure of a high platform without collapsing. And, crucially, it can absorb overwhelming praise without becoming distorted by pride.
That's the key.
So let's leave you with this final challenge, drawn right from the source material, something to really mull over this week. If you measured your readiness not by human approval, not by your salary, your title, your reputation, but strictly by God's standards, your faithfulness when you're unseen, your humility when you're corrected, what specific choices would you make differently in your job this week? And what long-held assumptions about your own advancement would you finally have to release?